Okay, welcome back everyone, and time for our next session. For those of you who aren't aware or maybe haven't had time to watch it, I put a link out in the chat window for you. Since this session is labeled Part 2 of Managing Azure for Citrix Admins, there's also a Part 1. Mike is going to recap that Part 1 session at the beginning of his session today, but I also put that recording link in the chat for you if you want to go back and watch it at some point. That is there. So let's get started. Moderating this session is DJ Eshelman. He is a CTA. He is a leader of the Nashville CUGC group, and he's also a Citrix consultant and coach. So he'll keep an eye on the questions for us today. So type those in as we go, and Mike will take them as he can. And with that, I'll hand things over to Mike. Mike is a member of our CUGC Content Working Group, and he is a CTP, among other things. He's a busy guy, and he helps us a lot at CUGC with our content. He's done a lot of webinars. He's always available to us, and we really appreciate his time today. So with that, Mike, I am going to hand you the screen, and let's get going.
Thank you, Stephanie. So the first thing I'm sorry?
I said part 2. I like how you classed it up for us, Mike.
Part 2. No, thank you very much. I really appreciate being able to do this again. You know, running through the first round of this, it was very interesting to get a lot of the feedback around the presentation, around some of the points that I covered. And what I wanted to do is I really wanted to expand on it. I really wanted to go deeper into what you can do inside of Azure. Now, this won't be focused, you know, around a lot of the Citrix components. It'll be focused around Azure because, you know, you really need to understand that. You know, and understand the environment that you're going to be working with once you actually make the move up to Azure with Citrix. So what I do want to first say is, DJ, that's an awesome title, by the way. I've never heard someone called a coach in their title, and I think that's really cool. So
yeah, it's a new thing for us. Yeah.
Does that mean you're a mentor, or what does that exactly mean?
Yeah, that's what we're going to be doing, mentoring others that are trying to get started in their Citrix careers or that have been in their Citrix careers for a while and just need a boost and some accountability.
Oh, that's very cool. That's very cool. And I'm sure a lot of folks out there will appreciate being able to hook up with that. Is that going to be through the CUGC?
No, that's a separate venture, but
okay.
Hopefully we can do some crossover there.
Okay, Stephanie, I think we should hook on to that. Anyways, no, once again, thank you very much for coming. First, obviously, the introduction. My name is Mike Nelson. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat as well. And you can reach me at Nell Media on Twitter or Mike at geektweakers.com. I am a cloud architect with Zerto. I've been a CTP since 2013. I am part of the content committee for CUGC, which Stephanie really drives, and we get to meet and talk about content. I am a Microsoft MVP in Cloud and Data Center, a Microsoft Azure advisor, and a VMware vExpert. So I'm kind of like all these things bundled into one. But as Stephanie said, I'm a very busy guy, and I try and balance a lot of this out. But one thing I'm really passionate about is the cloud, about moving to the cloud, about the public cloud, you know, more than just Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, you know, all kinds. I may not know that much about AWS and Google Cloud just because of some of the things I'm going to point out. And I think Ron pointed them out in the previous one as some of the bullet points that I had sent him about different terminology and different structure and things like that. But I also have to say it's very difficult to follow the only Ron Oglesby. It's you know, he's one of a kind. So I thought it was a great presentation, and hopefully I live up to being the second guy or the middle child here. So we're gonna get going here. Like Stephanie had first mentioned, some of the points we're going to cover. We are going to do a little bit of review of the part 1 and some of the things you need to know about Azure. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, of course. We're going to look at service status, some of the ways that you can look at service status and how to get that information. And then we're going to look at tips. And there are tips that we've gone through over the last couple of years of actually, you know, putting stuff into Azure, migrations, hybrid, all that kind of fun stuff. And then we're going to do demos and visuals. We're going to look at some of the actual components of Azure that you can use inside of Azure and outside of Azure to help you with your monitoring, your troubleshooting, and just basic, feel good, if you will, of the environment and how it's operating and how your users are using it, and so on. So the first slide I'm going to show here is the one that I showed in part 1 because I got so much response on this slide. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's kind of a cool slide, you know. Dolphins, they're really cool. But the point I was trying to make on this, if you watch part 1, is, you know, dolphins actually are one of a few. There are actually more than one, I've been told, that of animals, species of animals that can actually carry on 2 distinct conversations at the same time. So they can actually be communicating with, you know, to 2 different, in 2 different conversations at the same time. So the way that I related that was really as a Citrix administrator, this whole Azure thing is kind of, you know, kind of new, right? And when you talk about Citrix Cloud, you talk about your on-premises and you talk about Azure, you really need to understand all of it. And you need to kind of like be able to talk the language, you know, around all of it, but you also need to be able to talk to multiple people, right? So you not only are you talking Citrix, not only are you talking about your on-prem stuff, but you need to be talking about Azure. And it's really a multitasking, multi-language type of scenario. If you think about it, it's something that is not, you know, something that comes natively to a lot of folks. And hopefully I can help that out a little bit. This next one is actually a really kind of cool video that kind of expresses too. You're looking at a dog barking, right? Well, the dog is saying woof woof or ruff ruff as we call it, but in different languages, they call it different things. Even though the dog is still saying the same thing, other people call it something else. You know, how did I know that, you know, something called hob hob or wan wan would be the same thing as whoop whoop, what my dog does? It's really, you know, when you think about it, the kind that you have to get some kind of a synergy between how things are actually communicated around the cloud and how they relate to each other. Okay, so let's go step through our review a little bit. Okay, now one of the things I want to introduce you is something called cognitive humility. If you've never heard of that, that's actually a scientific theorem. And what it is it's the cognitive research shows that our minds are finite and far from noble, which means that knowing their limits can help us become better reasoners. Perhaps the most dire consequence is that human beings tend to be better at remembering evidence consistent with their beliefs. Now, why do I bring that up? What does this have to do anything with what we're talking about? Well, it has a lot to do with it, because what you're running into is running into some folks that have a firm understanding and established ideas around what they do on premises. Okay, and people think that whatever I do on premises, however I manage something on premises, however I troubleshoot something on premises, should be the same for the cloud. Well, it's not. Plain and simple, it's not. Okay, the cloud is not something you can touch. It's not something you can feel. You can't walk over to a server and you can't put your arms around it and hug it. You can't do that. Okay, so what we do is, as you know, natively as human beings, okay, we remember things that are consistent with our beliefs. We believe that we can fix something this way, right? So we remember that, but it doesn't always pertain to how it's fixed in another environment, i.e. the cloud. All right, so just keep that in the back of your mind as we move on. Now, this is the basic diagram that Citrix gives you about XenApp Essentials. The only reason I put this one up and the next one around XenDesktop Essentials is so you understand, you know, what is involved in the hierarchy and the topology of, you know, putting this solution together. All right, if you look at the actual Azure piece of this, the Azure piece actually contains a lot of the workload. All right, there's quite a few services that are up in Citrix Cloud, but a lot of the workload is really, you know, doing it in Azure. All right, now that's from the XenApp Essentials side. Let's look at the XenDesktop Essentials side. Even more so, because you're actually putting desktop workloads up there. okay? So that's when we'll get into a few points about Azure and what you need to be looking for, and you know, some of the tips that I'll be getting into a little bit later. But it's really important to have a basic understanding of what is going where. I think Ron kind of outlined that a little bit, but you need that as an overall when you're getting into a project or you're moving forward with this, or if you're already there, you need to know where things are. You need to understand, you know, where is a VDA? Where is this? Where is that? You need to know that. Okay. Now, fellow CTP and Christian Brinkoff actually provided this graphic on his blog. If you haven't seen it yet, the reason why I put this up there is because he kind of you know simplifies it quite a bit, but he added the Azure AD component, which is really kind of important now, right? Getting the Azure Active Directory, you know, up there and syncing with your on-premises Active Directory, or just running Azure Active Directory for all of your Active Directory needs. But I like the box on the right because it actually tells you about what is going inside of there from availability sets, okay, and then the cloud connectors. All right, so it really gives you an idea of what is being focused on inside of those availability sets. Now, availability sets in Azure are actually, you know, groups of services, not necessarily just VMs, but groups of services that are provided in availability groups. All right, which, you know, allow you to put them into high availability, to move them between availability regions, so on and so forth. I'll get into that in a little while. So this one was actually put out by JP Alfaro, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced the last name. I don't know JP, but he is a cloud success engineer with Citrix. They wrote something called the Cloud Guidepost series, which if you've gone out to the blog, you've probably seen. But JP actually outlined it, you know, from an aspect that gives you the layers, right? So the access layer, the control layer, and the resource layer. This is really kind of a good way to look at it from a 50,000 foot view, if you will, and how everything kind of communicates with each other, and what, you know, inside of Azure, what layers talk to each other, not necessarily resource groups or resources, but actually the layers, if you look at it that way from an architectural design point of view. This is really a good diagram to use when you're presenting or planning, you know, your environment. So when we get into that, talking about, you know, how these different groups and how the availability sets and how the resource groups and the different control plane and all that kind of work together, we start getting into something called accountability and responsibility. So when you guys thinking about your on-premises data center, you kind of map out, you know, who is really responsible for what. Okay, so you got, you know, maybe this person that's responsible for network, this person is responsible for the physical servers, this person's responsible for the VMware environment, so on and so forth, right? And what it comes down to is when something actually fails or some event happens, then you do an RCA, or, you know, or you get together and there has to be some kind of accountability, you know, upper management, or even, you know, just doing due diligence. You really need to determine a root cause and, you know, define the accountability for the event. All right. Now, when you start getting into the hybrid or the public cloud scenario, things change a little bit. All right. So from Citrix's point of view, Citrix's goal, and Ron mentioned this, was 99.9% availability in any 30-day calendar day period. This is directly from Citrix's documentation. All right. And of course, you can monitor it at status.citrixcloud.com, which, you know, we can take a look at. But this is kind of important because remember, Citrix is only one piece of this. And I know I caught on to something that Ron was talking about. Ron actually brought up that, hey, Citrix is responsible for Citrix, okay? You may have other providers such as Azure that really need to be responsible for Azure. Now, as a system administrator, it's kind of like, you know, when you call up, when something goes wrong, you call up Microsoft and you say, hey, something's wrong with this server. This server won't talk to that server. Well, Microsoft, you know, used to turn around and say, oh, it's your network, blame the network. Okay, everything you blame on the network. All right, so it's kind of like passing the buck. I'm not saying that you'll get into that situation, but I already have some people that have gotten into that because they all these pieces work together, but they're separate. Okay, so from, Citrix is saying the important thing is the limitations around what they are saying their SLA is around. One important thing to remember is that, of course, they're putting in the disclaimer, hey, if we don't own it, if we don't have control over it, okay, such as, public cloud provider failures, then there's nothing they can do about it. And you have to come to the realization of this. You don't have one provider that you can go to solve all these problems. Okay, you need to understand that and really understand how things talk to each other and work with each other. Okay, so just to move on, this is actually what Microsoft says is your responsibility, and this is what is our responsibility. All right, so when you start looking at on-premises, everything's yours, of course. Infrastructure, kind of half and half, a little bit more. Platform as a service, almost all Microsoft. And then software as a service, of course, it's all Microsoft. All right, so when you start working with Citrix and you start putting that out in the cloud or any other workloads in the cloud, you can kind of give an idea of what the different components use. Okay, if they use SQL database on the back end, if they use it as a platform as a service or as SaaS, or if you build a SQL box yourself, the storage, so on and so forth. You need to understand who's actually responsible for that. Now, again, JP in the Cloud Guidepost series actually published this where he said the Citrix Cloud operated by Citrix, customer partner manages everything from the cloud connector on down. So when you deploy something that's in the environment such as Zen Desktop or Zen App Essentials, you need to understand that this right here, the bottom part, is what Azure or you are responsible for. Okay, now I'm not saying that Citrix won't do their best effort and try and help you with situations, especially when you're dealing with a cloud connector or a NetScaler connector issue. That's kind of a gray area there, right? But I am positive the great folks at Citrix will try and help you the best they can. Microsoft, I know that they will try and help you the best they can, but they're much larger in terms of they have a lot more stuff that they need to support. So they may not be as helpful, but I know the folks at Citrix really try hard. So let's take a look at what Azure encompasses. Now, again, we're still in the review. I'm trying to get through this. You have Azure. You have what's inside of Azure. You have the Azure tenant and the account, okay? This is important to understand from a hierarchical point of view. You need to understand that when you start talking about, like we had a question in the last one, multi-tenancy for a CSP or an MSP, okay? You need to understand the hierarchy, all right? Now, one of the questions I know was about multi-tenancy inside of a CSP. Azure itself actually has limitations around multi-tenancy, even with Microsoft service providers, all right? So there are specific rules and policies that the service providers have to abide by, number one, but also there are limitations on what Microsoft will allow you to do as a service provider in Azure's cloud. Same with AWS, same with Google Cloud. But this kind of helps you understand the hierarchical arrangement of how all those resources are managed. So then from here, you go right to a subscription. Then on to what we call a directory. You have to now have some sort of a directory associated. An Azure Active Directory, it can be a pseudo directory, it can be a an actual Azure Active Directory associated with it. And then we go right into the resource groups. Now, the resource groups can contain all the components you're talking about, anything from virtual machines to SQL, to analytics, the network security groups, all that kind of stuff. This is actually the whole hierarchical view when you get into Azure. This is important to remember when you start trying to troubleshoot in Azure. All right, so we're going to move on right away to service status. Now, service status. Okay, this is kind of cool, if you think about it, if we had actual, you know, a Star Trek spaceship that we could, well, anyways. So it's kind of cool because you think about it, there are different providers that provide their own service status, but what about cross-platform, right? So if you look at it, you can go to status.cloud.com. That's going to give you the Citrix information, right? Of what is actually happening. Citrix Cloud okay? Is ShareFile okay? Is ZenMobile okay? You see a lot of data here. You see a lot of drill down. No, this is just supposed to be like a green, yellow, red, you know, type of status for Citrix Cloud, if you will. Okay. If you want more information, then you need to dig deeper. Okay, now with Citrix Cloud, currently it's somewhat limited in what you can look at. Okay, they do have some of their own monitoring tools, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But it is limited. It's masked, if you will. Okay. But when you start getting into Azure, Azure is much more open about their status overall. You can actually drill down, okay, by getting your own personalized dashboard. You can drill down into, you know, things that are happening within Azure, even from a region availability point of view. They actually publish the tickets that if they have an outage, they had a European outage just last week, or it was earlier this week, and they published the actual ticket number. And you could go out there and you could actually take a look at what the status was. Now, of course, they're not going to let you actually see the ticket and all the communication they're having and everything else, but you get more detail about what's actually the, you know, they're looking at, what may be the root cause, so on and so forth. All right. Then we have some third parties. Now, I don't know if anybody has tried cloudharmony.com. It is not, you know, it's not like eHarmony for cloud geeks. All right. Cloud Harmony is actually a service that was originally owned by Gartner. Okay. And it's been kind of pushed off, and there's some other folks that are managing it now, and sometimes it's difficult to know who's really running it. But anyways, what it does is it gives you a lot of information around different types of clouds, not only Azure, but all kinds. And I'm going to show that in a little bit. Then we have some third-party tools you can take a look at, right? You may use EG Innovations, you may use Goliath Technologies. They both have an Azure aspect to them. All right, EG Innovations has an Azure monitor, so does Goliath. Now, are there others out there? I'm sure there are, okay, but these are really the only ones that I'm familiar with. You know, and there may be, you know, one of the big management tools of Citrix, ControlUp, they're not there yet, but I hear they're gonna have something maybe soon, okay? And then this one's kind of cool. I want to play this one out. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of Hyperglance. I'm going to play this. This is actually a YouTube video. But Hyperglance is something that, you know, it's a paid thing. It's not free. But what's really cool about it is they actually integrate AI into their platform. All right, so they start using the artificial intelligence statistics gathering out of Azure to take a look at some of the trends and some of the things that they try and be preemptive and proactive about. Okay, so if you get a chance, you take a look at Hyperglance and what it can do. It's really kind of a cool technology. So let's move on to some tips. Okay, and I hopefully will be able to help you out to understand some of the things that we've gone through and some of the things I've gone through with clients and such. So here we go. Now, first thing I want to talk about is something called shifting baseline syndrome. I'm really you know, I have a hobby of looking at scientific theorems. I really am interested in that kind of stuff. And they have the belief that what we perceive as normal, not taking into account the full extent of the past nor potential future events. And if you look at it, you know, this really has to do with the bottom line of what is normal is constantly changing. And if you're going to troubleshoot something, if you're going to put a service up in a public cloud and use that service, you need to understand that the baseline you created may be a week ago, a month ago, a year ago is probably not the same baseline that you should be using, because what is considered normal on that original baseline is like it says, constantly changing. Now, this is with the human factor, but it's also with, everyday things that we deal with. Okay. And it really helps you when you get that frame of mind that, hey, maybe what I'm looking at might be an anomaly. It might be a false positive. It might be just, what it is like today. All right. So the first thing that I really like to push to people, and I can tell you that this has been the scare factor and the calls at 1 o'clock in the morning going, holy cow, what is this all about? Tell me, I need to know, because I'm going to have the CEO or CTO calling me tomorrow asking me what's going on. All right. And that is all based around consumption. Okay. You need to understand what your consumption is in the public cloud. When you're in the on-premises world, no big deal, right? Yeah, you have to figure out how much power you're using. You need to figure out how much disk space you're using and network you're using. But you know what? You own it already. All right. Or you just buy more and throw more hardware at it, right? Well, not the same in the public cloud. In the public cloud, any public cloud, all right, you need to understand that consumption is key. How much you're actually consuming and how much you're allowed to spend. Okay, and I cannot stress this enough. Go into this, okay, go into your project, go into your planning, go into your design, and be sure that consumption is a key part of what you take a look at and what you forecast. Okay, just if you have to, take a number, add 20% and say, yeah, this is our consumption. But you need to have something, okay? Because otherwise you're gonna get sticker shock. You're gonna get, the CFO is gonna get a bill in the mail from Azure and they're gonna be like, okay, what is this? I've had that happen. I've had a CFO come to me and say, we did a POC and it just cost me $5,000. Why is that? Well, the POC, you put some workloads out there and they really chewed up consumption. Well, how come they didn't tell me about this? Well, I wasn't part of the planning. Otherwise, I would have said, you have to be aware that you're going to spend some money here. Okay. So enough of that. I'm not going to, I'll drive that a little bit more, but I'm done. I'll get off my soapbox now. One interesting piece about this slide, if you're looking at that meter that's kind of spinning around, that electricity meter, you know what that's from? That's actually a clip that I took from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation when Clark turns on all the lights on the house.
I was wondering.
It's the actual clip. It's the picture, the frame that they took. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so like I said, you need to watch your spend. All right, and I'm going to give you an example. Just like I did in the part one, I kind of updated it because now they have a new way of looking at it, number one, but also they've changed their pricing, right? They change their pricing all the time. If you didn't know that, I mean, they'll come out and they'll tell you, but they do it quite frequently. So when you look at West US 2, if you're looking at any of these types of machine types, of instance types, along with South Central US, look at the price difference. Sure, 47.62 to 42.51, not a big deal, right? $378.70 per month from $340.75, per month. Not a big deal. Okay, add that up. How many instances do you have times that number? Number one. Number two, this is just West US and South Central. Okay, when you start getting into other regions of the world, like in the European regions, in the APAC regions, and so on and so forth, price is totally different. Okay, so it's really easy to put all of your stuff up into one region in Azure, but that may not be the same region that you deploy to next time. or if you acquire a company that is located in another part of the world and you need to provide them services which is closer to them, you're going to need to deploy Citrix up in Azure closer to them, which means you will be in a different region, which means you will probably pay a different price for all of your resources. All right. And that's what I outlined there. So that's when I start talking about regions. Look at all these different regions. Okay. Germany North is not going to be the same cost, I would bet any money, than what South Africa West is. Okay. So you need to really look at that. Then you also need to be aware of your limits. Now, I'm kind of regurgitating what Ron had said in his presentation, and I apologize for that. But these are the points that I actually sent Ron, and I didn't know he was going to use them in his deck. But you know, I sent them to him because I'm like, hey, these are some of the things I'm going to talk about, and then he put them in his deck. So, anyways, you need to be aware of your limits. Now, Microsoft publishes these limits, but you need to understand you have, when you go into a subscription inside of Azure, a single subscription, not a resource group, okay, not a tenant, but a subscription, that you have restrictions. Now, these restrictions are not worldwide, okay, because number one, they may have different restrictions in different data centers that you know, are obviously much smaller than what we have in the US, okay, or much larger. Number two, not all of these resources may be available in the region. Okay, you may have certain aspects of what you're trying to do or workloads you're trying to put up that may not be available in that region. You may have to put them in a different region. Okay, so please be aware of your limits. Understand that it's very important. Then what are you going to do? What is your planning for disaster recovery? What happens when all these workloads up in the public cloud, Azure or otherwise, suddenly just disappear, or you know, they have an outage, or you know, someone goes in and actually, you know, deletes what you have out there manually, goes out and deletes a resource group, deletes, you know, a storage account. Okay, what do you have in place, or what will you plan for disaster recovery of your workloads in Azure? It's very important. Now, Citrix actually has a paper about working with ASR. All right, so if you're not familiar, ASR is actually the Azure Server Recovery. All right, and ASR is Azure's disaster recovery in Azure. Now, there are other things or other methods that people use, and even other products, okay, that people use, including, you know, the product that for the company that I work for, or Azure Backup, Azure Files, Azure Snapshots, so on and so forth. There's all kinds of different things that you can do, even your own backup platform, you know, your own resiliency platform. But you need to make sure that you have this planned out and you understand what the implications are if you lose those workloads in the cloud. There's no guarantee in the cloud. I can tell you that right now. If you go out and you take a look at the gentleman named Mark Rosanovich, which I'm sure folks who know Microsoft know Mark, he actually did 2 presentations. He just did one at Build where he talks about the Azure infrastructure, the back-end infrastructure. It tells you everything about it. It tells you about networking and instance sizes and all that kind of cool stuff. And he even says, you have a minimum of 3 copies of the data that you put up. Okay, you have a minimum of 3 copies of that data inside of a region. All right, so it's distributed among data centers within a region. The problem is that sometimes if that data gets corrupted, it's replicated to those other areas as well. So is anything ever really safe? No, when you think about it. So just something I think you should really plan for and design for. So let's move on right away. We're going to take a look at some open source websites, tool sets, frameworks that you can take a look at to help you along the way of managing Citrix and Azure. There are some websites that I'm going to show you real quick, and these are them. They actually are some that I've used extensively. The last one's kind of cool. I'll show you that too when we get to it. Then, of course, you have the Azure APIs, PowerShell and Cloud Shell, and then you have the new Windows Admin Center, aka the former Project Honolulu. If you haven't seen that, I'll show that to you as well. And finally, we have the open source. Now, I don't know if any of you do current monitoring or log shipping or SNMP or alerting out of open source. If you have your own third-party tool, if you use Logly or you use Logic Monitor, I don't know what you use, okay? But there are some open source products that you can use as well to create some really cool monitoring, analytics, alerting dashboards and solutions around Azure data. And this is just some of them. I'm going to show you the Grafana solution, but I have used Elastic Stack, which is really cool. It's kind of a little bit more complicated, but it's really cool. And then you can also integrate with some some other open source network management systems. All right. So let's move on to the demos now. The demo deities. I'm asking the demo deities to please help me out here, because the last time I did this, and it was live webinar, I had this on my screen, and I had this on my screen for 10 minutes, and I could not do a demo. So please help me out here. Again, I'm putting my Twitter handle on the bottom, Nell Media, and you can reach me at mike@geektweakers.com. Now, I know that Stephanie probably wants me to show this slide. She's probably going to show it at the end, but I'm going to show this to you real quick, and then I'll get into the demos. Okay, my CUGC. If you don't belong to it today, you should be there. Be square. It's cool, and that's what we're all about. Okay, so I am going to end this, and I just lost my screen. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I'm going to bring up a bunch of windows here. All right. The first one I'm going to show you is first Azure Quick Start templates. If you don't use Azure Quick Start templates, I encourage you to go look at them. The reason is when you start dealing with trying to monitor, manage, and do things inside of Azure, these Quick Start templates can really help you out. Because all they are is basically they're a template that you go in, you click on one, and you're able to deploy it directly to Azure. Okay, these quick start templates are actually a direct reflection of what's on GitHub under GitHub Azure Quick Start templates. All right, everything that's here is translated into this web page in real time. So all of this lists all of the templates that you can use inside of Azure to deploy literally hundreds of solutions, predefined solutions that'll get you up and running inside. Now, the reason why I point this out is because I was talking about third-party solutions, right? Using Grafana, using Elasticsearch. So if I search for Elastic, obviously Elasticsearch does have their own ARM template, which allows you to do it. Now, I had to implement that, and I can't see it right here. I had it up before. Anyways, I know it's out there. And also we have like Telegraph. When I talked about Telegraph, Influx, and Grafana, if you click on this, this will actually do a full deployment of these three components. It'll tell you how, it'll deploy the VMs, it'll set up SSH, and then it'll allow you to connect. All right. Now, all you need to do is if you're logged into Azure, you just have to click deploy to Azure. Boom. There it goes. It's going to deploy it. It's going to bring up the wizard blades. It's going to ask you for your parameters, and then it's going to deploy it for you. All right. The visualize button is kind of cool because it actually visualizes, and I don't know if this is going to work, but this actually shows you what the solution is going to look like from a connectivity point of view. It'll show you what it's deploying and how things are connected to each other. Okay, so real quick, on to these components. We have the Azure Latency test at azurespeed.com. If you are troubleshooting, this is really a good site to troubleshoot actual latency, okay, or upload download speed to Azure, depending on where you are. And you can also, execute it from different parts of the world to, different regions inside of Azure. It really helped out when I was trying to troubleshoot something that was happening over in Malaysia. They had a site over in Malaysia, and trying to troubleshoot how that latency, that connectivity was happening from that site up to the region they were located in. It really does help out. It gives you, what's going on with the latency. Now, obviously, I haven't refreshed this since I started, so it's not going to tell me anything. But azurespeed.com. And then we have the speed test. Now, the speed test is really more basic. It just basically tells you, what is your average latency to these different regions inside of Azure. All right. Then it does give you other things, like if you wanted to actually do it for AWS, they actually have an AWS speed test. So if you use AWS Cloud, you can do that as well. All right. Very basic, very quick. And then I'm going to move on to Cloud Harmony. Now, Cloud Harmony is like you could spend a couple of hours inside of this tool. If you are going to go look at something, if you want to say, you can enter, a search term. If you just put in Azure, it's going to say, okay, you want to do network performance for Azure. It's going to go through globally, and it's going to give you the queries and the latency for anything like an Azure virtual machine. It's going to go to US West, and it's going to start talking about the content delivery networks from Akamai or from Verizon, what the latencies are, all this kind of stuff. This is because I found it extremely helpful when you're trying to troubleshoot a service, okay, or connectivity to Azure, to and from Azure. It's incredibly helpful. All right, you can get into advanced stuff. You can troubleshoot all kinds of stuff. This is just a network perf. You can get into the network test. You can get into service status, where it's going to tell you, this is what the slide that I showed you. It tells you what the availability is for the last 30 days, how many outages they had, what their downtime was. And that's just for, even Amazon. Look at Amazon. Oh, Amazon had an EC2 outage in CA Central 1, for 6.87 minutes. Boy, they had a big one here, US East 2, 34.3 minutes they had an outage. Okay, so even the cloud providers, some of the guys that I talk to from a CSP or an MSP standpoint will reference this when they start to get it. Now, your cloud provider might even be in there. If you look at the provider directory, look at some of these. These aren't just Azure and AWS and Google. This is, Cloudflare. This is DigitalOcean. Even, IBM Cloud, if you work with them, all kinds of stuff. So, you can really, learn a lot from taking a look at this and understanding when you're trying to connect to something and work with something and troubleshoot something. All right, so that's Cloud Harmony. All right, now this is the last one. This is the Microsoft, the Hurricane Electric. Now, network guys will know this. Network folks that are hardcore, that started their careers in network, that, know the bits and bytes and packets and all of the kind of stuff. They know about Hurricane Electric, because Hurricane Electric has been around for a very, 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 very long time. And if you're ever troubleshooting a network issue, this is really, really deep inside of the network troubleshooting, okay? You can actually take a look at how BGPs, peers, and things like that talk to each other. Now, this is actually AS8075, all right, which is a Microsoft ASN number. And you look at that and you can see what routes Microsoft actually takes to get to their core, to their routers. All right, and you can look at the AS info. It'll tell you everything about the AS info and who the ASN is, okay, and then give you statistics around it. This has been out here for, it's been out here forever, and it's just something that is really good to know. All right, so that's what I was going to show you from the third party, except for the Grafana. So let's take a real quick look. Nope, that's Windows Admin Center. Where's my Grafana? There it is. So Grafana, if you don't know, Grafana is a graphing engine. It really is. It's a dashboard graphing engine. But one of the cool things is that inside of Azure, this is the Azure Portal, by the way. It may not look like yours, obviously. I've got a lot more junk on mine, if you will. But you can actually go in here And if you do a create a resource, you can search for it. Just search for Grafana. Okay, and you can get Grafana as a appliance, as a VM, create a VM, or you can get it as a container image. If you're not familiar with containers, I won't get into that. That'll take a very long time, but you can get it as a container image or as a VM. And if you pick Grafana, this is actually a free resource that you can go out and create your own monitoring solution just by deploying this. All right, and that's exactly what I did. Okay, so when you deploy Grafana, it has something that you need to add called the Azure plugin, the Azure monitoring plugin. And when you actually go to create a graph, I created a real simple graph here. But if you actually go in and you take a look at your data sources, all right, yep, I want to save those. No. You'll actually see someone called an Azure MVP, well, it's a monitor, Azure monitor. It's called MVP Sub because that's mine. But it's an actual Azure monitor as a type. Okay, you need to add that. Once you do that, it's going to ask you for subscription IDs, all that kind of stuff, and for a key and all that kind of funky stuff. And then it's going to connect directly to your subscription, whatever subscription ID you give it, and then start graphing that information on graphs that you create. All right. Now, please don't be taking snapshots of that and hacking my subscription IDs. I'd really appreciate it if you didn't do that. Anyways, so if we take a look at dashboard 1, like I said, I just do a simple percentage of CPU for this object. I can actually go in and add a row where I'm going to create a heat map based on something. And that heat map, when I go to edit it, it'll ask me what the data source is, and I say it's the Azure monitor. I select the resource group that I have up in Azure. I select the namespace. I select the actual VM, and then I select a metric that I want the heat map to be, to show. Okay, so this is just doing real quick a disk read operations per second. All right, so if you have an environment that's up there like Citrix, and you have even, workstations up in the Zen desktop or servers that you're working with on the Windows side or Linux side, which might be outside of the Citrix realm. But anyways, if you're working with those, you can actually, just start monitoring them yourself outside of any other tools, and just stand this up and create your own pretty dashboards and create alerting. You can do alerting in Grafana and all that kind of cool stuff. So I encourage you to go take a look at that. Now, I'm going to hop back here into the Azure portal, and I'm going to show you. I think I have about 15 minutes left. So this is the actual dashboard, right? One of the things you're going to see here is you're going to see service health, service issues. Now, it only shows the regions that you have items defined in. I don't have anything defined in this tenant. I don't have anything defined in other regions of the world. But if you were to click on here, it actually gives you all the information, some of which I was telling you, where, if there were anything that would be showing, okay, as a service issue, it would show here. You can look at their planned maintenance, what actually are they planning to do? And then if they have any health advisories. Now, obviously you can take a look at all the past ones. So I haven't had any. You can take a look at the resource health. And if I select my subscription and I take a resource type, which is, all kinds of stuff, just the virtual machines, you can see that it's actually going to tell me that I can click one of these and take a look at the overall health of any of the VMs that I have that are inside of this subscription and in this resource. Now, this is taking a while. Anyways, trust me, it does show up. You can click on it and you can see that. There it goes. Then I can actually click on it and I can take a look at, like, there's the Grafana machine. Oh, the Grafana machine is telling me that this health history is this, its resource health over the last 2 weeks has been pretty good. Okay. And it tells you that, there aren't any known Azure issues affecting this. Had one health event. Oh, look at that on 6/17. Virtual machine was unavailable. Wonder why? I don't know. I'd have to look into the logs for that virtual machine to find out. Okay, so that's just really quick, right off your dashboard. Now, the thing I want to get into, you know, obviously you have your resource groups, which everyone should know about. You're going to have a resource group for your Citrix environment, right? So this will list all of your resource groups, all right? And when you actually go into a resource group, it'll tell you about the VMs. Let me go into one here. Let me pick one I know that has, there we go. And inside of here, you're going to see a virtual machine. I know this one is running. Okay, and obviously this gives you all the information about it. Now, when you're inside of a VM and you select this VM, you can see all kinds of things about this VM, even if, you know, it was something that was deployed by someone other than you. All right, you start getting into activity logs. You start getting into, you know, taking a look at, when you look further down here, you know, what the change tracking, this is kind of cool. If you look at change tracking, is actually what was changed on your machine, you know, which is part of analytics. It's not enabled for this one, but if I wanted to enable it, it goes into an OMS account, which, there we go. And then I just want to enable it. Deployment started. Okay, so that's going to go tell me, and it's going to watch that machine for any changes that happen. You can start looking into metrics. If you start looking into metrics, that's when you start looking at all the different things, the CPUs, a disk write, kind of like a perf counter type of scenario, right? You're starting to get a little deep here. All right, you're starting to get, you know, hey, I want to look at exactly, you know, what is the percentage of CPU? What is the logical disk idle time? If you're really starting to get down into the troubleshooting of something. Metrics does have a new experience where it's kind of graphical. I'm actually doing an app process here. So it could, you know, it has a nice graph. You can drill down on it. Take a look at the exceptions. This was for another demo that I did. So it's really kind of cool how that works. One of the other things is you diagram. Diagram actually tells you how a virtual machine is connected to its parts, which is really kind of cool. You know, how everything's connected, you click on it, and you're going to go directly to it. That was something new. And then, of course, I don't know if you knew this, but you actually have a redeploy. So if you ever have a machine that you just want to, you know, you're like, wow, something's really broken with this thing, just click redeploy and it'll bring back up the wizard and I want you to deploy it again. So enough of that. I'm going to move right into Monitor because I'm running out of time. Actually, Advisor first. Azure Advisor, if you haven't used it, this actually looks across all of your subscriptions if you select all of them, and it'll give you advice. Advice, you know, take it with a grain of salt, right? It's another baseline that is constantly changing, but it gives you advice about high availability, security costs, so on and so forth. Sometimes I find this really helpful. Sometimes I find it like, yeah, not so helpful. So, you know, your mileage may vary, but it does bring some good information, especially when you start seeing red like this and you're trying like, wow, why is my security so bad? Well, sometimes when you look at that, it's just because you have RDP open to the internet. Big red flag, audit will catch that, so on and so forth. All right, so Monitor is the key though. Monitor is actually where all of Microsoft Azure's monitoring is going to be moved into. Okay, all of its log analytics, all of its OMS, all of its metrics, everything is going to be eventually put under the Monitor umbrella. They've already started, you know, finishing up the move of OMS into Monitor, but Azure Monitor will be the go-to place in the future for anything that has to deal with troubleshooting, monitoring, or alerting. Okay, and this is when you can get into creating alerts. You know, you actually go in and you can create alerts based on SEV, all that kind of stuff. I wish I could cover all of this, but I don't have all the time in the world here. So one of the things I did want to point out is when you start getting into the network watcher, if you deal with network issues, which I seem to deal with quite a bit, this is where network watcher, where you can actually do like, you know, packet captures, you know, IP flow verifies. You can even take a look at the topology of if I was to pick a resource here, and a resource group, and then a virtual network, let's see what that has. This will actually show me a topology of how things are connected. Now, this is going to be really interesting in a Citrix. Okay, so if you have a resource group that's Citrix, I advise you to take a look at this and how everything is connected and how it goes through a NIC and then eventually goes out a load balancer. For many of you didn't know, putting NetScaler up into Azure, okay, is really cool, but you do realize that there's already a load balancer there from Azure, right? So any resource that's put that has an external facing interface in Azure automatically gets an Azure load balancer in front of it. You cannot change that. That is something that is predefined. So you have a load balancer in front of a load balancer, and sometimes you have a recommendation to put a load balancer in front of a NetScaler load balancer. So you have a load balancer in front of a load balancer in front of a load balancer. Now, that doesn't mean they're all balancing loads. That means they're all doing kind of different functionality, right? And it's you know, you need to understand that the NetScaler is not the only thing up there. All right. Usage and quotas is the other thing too, right? This is where you start getting into, like Ron said, all of a sudden you start running out of resources, or you can't build something. It's because your quotas are all used up. You know, inside of your subscription, you need to be aware of this. If you run out of public IP addresses, you run out of virtual networks, if you run out of load balancers, you're only allowed a certain amount. Again, this gets back to the limitations of the subscription. Okay. Other things, you can take a look at traffic analysis, diagnostic logs, NSG flows, so on and so forth. I've got a couple minutes left. I really want to show you this though. If you have not seen this yet, this is the Windows Admin Center. It is free from Microsoft. It is the future of monitoring for Microsoft. You're asking me, why am I showing this? Because it does on-prem and it does cloud. It does a Windows server that's located anywhere as long as it can talk to it. All right, so all in one dashboard, you could be monitoring all this. There's a lot more information out at Microsoft about this, but I did want to show you that this is actually an Azure machine right here. This is one that's running in Azure, and I can connect to it as long as my credentials stayed, yep, and I can manage it. I can look at events, devices, I can look at the firewall, I can change things in the registry, I can upload and download files, I can do all kinds of cool stuff. I can even run updates, okay? And then, as a little treat, when we get to Server 2019, which this is build 17692, if you go into that, this actually has something called System Insights. Now, when Citrix supports this is going to be awesome, because if you go into System Insights, it actually can show you capacity planning and forecasting for that VM. All right, so it'll go through and it'll tell you, hey, how much volume do you think I'll be using in the future, and what's my forecast, and what's the history of what I've used it for. So I really encourage you to install Windows Admin Center. It can install on a Windows 10 box, it can install on a server, and give it a shot. Try it out. And I am almost out of time. DJ, do we have any questions? Because I don't even think I'll have a lot of time to cover them, but
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Yeah, one was kind of answered in the chat, but I thought it was a good thing to bring up for everyone. And that question was, is monitoring free in Azure, or is it something that's chargeable separately?
So monitoring is, well, they want you to believe it's free, but you have a backend, it has to be stored, right? So you're using storage consumption, okay? And if you're using like Network Watcher, you're actually using network bandwidth, okay? So to say something is free, it still has ramifications into consumption because of the fact that, you know, you need to store those logs somewhere, you need to store the analytics somewhere, you need to provide bandwidth for the network watcher to do traffic flows and all that kind of stuff. So yes, you are going to use consumption.
Awesome. Next one was, how can we get more accurate monitoring metrics from the Citrix Cloud Management site, which I think is probably
I don't
a mixed
know that.
bag there, but yeah.
maybe Marius has more information on that than I do. I really don't know. I mean, everything that I've seen has been, you know, very limited, but that could be just my field of vision into that. So I'll let people, you know, that know more about that answer that question.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess the other piece of that is something that I was kind of wondering about too, and on more of the resource side of things with XenApp and Zen Desktop VMs themselves. If you deploy them in Azure, is the sizing recommendations actually good for that or not? Is it anything?
Yeah, actually they've changed that. I don't know if you saw that, but they actually changed some of the sizing recommendations.
Yes.
And I think that's based off of experience, if you will. And it's a good thing because, they have more people deploying this, so they have a little bit more metrics or telemetry to go by, feedback, if you will, that tells them, hey, maybe this machine size should be bigger. But also what Ron said is it's really a scale thing. Because in Azure, you can auto scale and you can auto scale in Citrix Cloud, but it's really kind of a scale thing too, is that do you want to have to add RAM and CPU later on? So, it's kind of it's really a planning thing. And I can tell you from experience that a lot of folks have had to redeploy or have had to beef up their environment after a few months of usage. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Something to keep an eye on. It's a good takeaway to make sure that you are always keeping an eye on consumption in Azure. It can get away
Yep.
from you pretty fast.
Yes, very much so. I'm out of time. I really
Yeah,
appreciate everyone. DJ, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you helping me out here.
absolutely.
Steph, thank you very much. And to the audience, thank you very, very much. Again, if you have questions, just let me know. And I hope you all have a great morning, great afternoon, or great evening, wherever you are.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mike.
Mike.
Yep.
Thanks, that was awesome. Do we need a part 3 in the future?
Well, if there's demand, I will certainly accommodate.
All right, everybody, you heard that. You're going to get a survey link later today, so that'll be the place to say it. But thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it, and thank you, DJ, for keeping an eye on the questions. We're going to take another short break, and we'll come back in just a few minutes with Marius Sandbu,